On your screen is Maochun Yu. He is a professor at the U.S. Naval Academy. He's also the author of this book, OSS in China, Prelude to Cold War. Professor Yu, if you would, start by briefly describing China's role in World War II.
China's role in World War II is very complex. First of all, China entered the war first. Most people in China would agree that China entered the World War II way back in 1937. In July 1937, when China and Japan went to a full-scale war. But that fact, of course, was not recognized by the mainstream Western scholarship because most people, World War II started on September 1st, 1939, when German tanks rolled into Poland. So in that sense, China was into the war much earlier, so lasts longer. On the other hand, World War II was basically a fully mechanized and large campaign-style war, which really did not happen in China per se. So the war in China was important to much larger part of the world only after Pearl Harbor. So when the war in China, which had been going on for a good part of 4 years, suddenly became part of the global war. And when China officially became ally with not only Great Britain but also the United States most prominently. So there is sort of a axis of democracy, if you will, against the axis of evil during World War II. So that's the issue. However, China's role in World War II, in theory, should be very important because of Pearl Harbor, because China, as well as the United States, face the same Asian enemy. So U.S. strategy should focus on China theater immediately, Asia theater at least. But because of Britain's persuasion and because of Roosevelt's strategic thinking, and U.S. and ally overall adopted the policy of a Europe first, Asia second strategy. That dramatically reduced the importance of China theater, which has become a major issue during wartime politics. So China constantly tried to justify its importance in the overall global strategy, while most of the British try to downplay that role. And I think, in retrospect, both sides had its validity in their argument. By the time China became very important toward the end of 1943, 1944, the nature of warfare has changed because the U.S. original strategy was to drive Japanese to the Western Pacific, to the edge, and then land on China, from China to go north and go through Japan homeland. But by the end of 1943 and the beginning of 1944 particularly, after the Solemn Battle and the Battle of Leyte Gulf in the Philippines, the U.S. realized there was a much better way to go after Japan, that is, go through the sea. So the land route, which was originally planned by way of China, became much less insignificant. So that's why China theater is very complex.
Professor Yu, why did Japan attack China in 1937?
Well, that's a long story. To make it short, both Japan and China were modernizing militarily, politically, and economically in 1930s. And Japan has a very different national psyche than the Chinese. China is big, divided, and is deeply torn between the communist movement and the nationalist movement. Japan is much more unified and feeling much insecure because of the size of the nation and also because of its ambition, which is big. So Japan also had a very strong, was impacted by the German experience in World War II. And so they believe that Germany was defeated in World War I because it lacked a lot of territorial possession overseas, which will provide industrial machine with raw materials and markets, those things. So Japan wants to basically to prepare for the next sort of a superpower position in Asia, and that's one reason to go after China, which is very next door.
What was the OSS?
The OSS stands for Office of Strategic Services. which was created in July 1941 by the executive order from FDR. It was the predecessor to the CIA. So you might say the OSS is to the CIA what the Continental Congress to the U.S. government after George Washington became president. So it has the major features and the major mission features of the centralized intelligence. The OSS was very unique because it was the first national intelligence service responsible to one command, and that is the president. And before that, before the OSS was created, our intelligence service had always been departmentalized, highly technical. You have the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy. You have the State Department and FBI and Treasury, Commerce. Every major agency of the U.S. government had its own intelligence service of specialized nature. So the OSS was created to nationalize or centralize that intelligence existence, which is something that the model after the British, which is also very controversial nature of the OSS because people always blame the OSS for being too pro-British, too much influenced by the British system. So it was a very interesting experience because World War II was the prime opportunity for the proponent of a centralized intelligence to prove its worth. And that's why OSS experience in World War II was fascinating, and it generated a lot of documents for the eventual purpose of providing legal justification of its worth. And the China theater became a very important proving ground. That's because all the existing military generals or admirals did not really like having a overarching intelligence service working under them because they were the local boss. And only in China, the China theater, the command structure was a mess. There was no unity of command. And Donovan, the creator, the director of the OSS, saw the opportunity. So he invested very heavily in the China theater, tried to thrive on chaos, and which OSS did succeed to some degree. And I read this book because I thought this was a very important angle to illustrate an important aspect of how the U.S. intelligence bureaucracy and how U.S.-China relationship were formulated in this very complicated labyrinth of bureaucracy and inter-service rivalry.
Well, Professor Yu, what was the OSS role in China during World War II?
The OSS role in China was, again, it's a very complicated story because OSS went to China initially with one single most important mission, that is to establish a independent intelligence operation free of control by not only the Chinese but also by other major players of the U.S. government, namely the Big Four, the State Department, the Army, Navy, and the FBI. So it wants to prove that it can actually coordinate all the intelligence services above all the other four intelligence offices run by different departments. So they go to China to do a lot of things. And essentially, it didn't work that way because of the complex command structure in China. The Army and Navy didn't get along. The American military commander and Chinese nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek didn't get along. And there was a communist forces, there's a nationalist forces. So it's total mess. And OSS tried to find its niche, its space in China. Essentially, they succeeded in somewhat, but they also had some big lessons to learn from.
Would you describe Zhou Enlai, Chiang Kai-shek, and Mao Zedong during World War II as semi-allies?
In rhetoric only, because there's two political entities, the Chinese are nationalists, the Chinese communists. Essentially, they have a very different political vision for China. And they were motivated by
But they all wanted the Japanese out, correct?
They all wanted the Japanese out, but the Japanese is to a lot of people, some people in China, for example, the nationalists, it's the purpose of itself. You defeat Japan, kick Japan out, and China will be unified. For the communists, to a certain degree, is not the end of itself. It's a tool, it's a means through which to overthrow its opponent, the nationalist government. So that's why